Come on in and welcome to your Rambo Moves, the chess adventure channel. Chess for Everybody is the subtitle of this channel, and I hope everybody is tuned in. Usually I make videos in German, chess videos, and this is my first step into the international scene. But my mother tongue is German, so if I am lacking an expression or fumfering for words, please cut me some slack. This is a new thing. Yeah, well, let's jump right into it. Today I brought to you 10 examples of Bronstein tactics. Well, they're not all by Bronstein, but they're all taken from Bronstein-games. David Bronstein, of course, one of the giants of chess, almost became world champion in 1951. And here we go, right away with the first example. Oh, by the way, you can solve along, and if you don't want to solve along, just enjoy the show. Here we go. Bronstein with the white pieces against Andor Lilienthal, and he is in a winning position mainly due to the backward c-pawn, which is inevitably going to fall. Rook d5 is threatened, and this is a lost position in a higher sense, but Lilienthal now made a mistake that hastened his downfall. He played knight to d4. And if you want to, now is the time to pause the video and try to find the tactic that Bronstein uncorked. I will be gone for 3 seconds, plus minus, and in the meantime you can, as I say, pause the video, or you can just wait 3 seconds and then I will come back, present the solution. See you. So here I am back, and the solution has got to do with a pin or apparent pin of the c-pawn. The c-pawn is kind of pinned due to the heavy artillery placed on the c-file. White would like to play rook to d4. Unfortunately, it doesn't right away work. If black takes back, his queen is sufficiently protected. There's 2 rooks behind it. So if white decides to take the queen, he will not gain anything. In fact, he will just be down the exchange, which he sacrificed on e4. And he will lose this endgame. The rook is much stronger. These 2 pawns will be picked up, or this one will be promoted eventually. So this doesn't work, but white would like to make it work. We have to notice that his knight is under attack because the queen is no longer protecting it after the knight has been placed on d4. So this is a hint. White played knight to d6, saving his knight, but also attacking one of the defenders of the queen. So if now black had decided, this is not what he did, but if he had decided to move the rook, now this tactic would actually work. White is just winning a piece. It doesn't matter whether black takes or not. If he takes the rook, white just regains a rook on c6 and is up a piece. The piece is here, and the pawn does not present any danger. White just picks it up at leisure. So this doesn't work. White would win a piece. So what black did was he saved his piece and just gave up the exchange, which is a little less than losing a whole piece, but it's still enough to ensure victory for white. So this is how it proceeded, and eventually white won. Let's go to the second example. Bronstein, 50 years later than the last game. That was played in 1944. This one is played in 1994. So 50 years have passed, and Bronstein is still a strong player. He's playing with the black pieces, and he is way ahead, almost winning by engine estimation, by engine evaluation. His opponent is Morten Hendriksen, and Bronstein now with the black pieces played bishop to g4. And bishop to g4 is a good move, objectively, but it also entails a little trap. So Hendriksen now took the bishop, which was actually the trap. And in this position, black, Bronstein has a beautiful combination ready, and I ask you, let's see if you can find it. I'll be back in 3 seconds. Okay, so if I call something beautiful, you probably guessed that it must be something with a sacrifice, and that's true. Queen to h2 is the sacrifice, pulling the king out of the corner. And, well, if you sacrifice your queen, you either have to get it back or you have to mate, and in this case, it's actually a mating attack. The rook gives a check, but it is a double check. The bishop was uncovered. So in a double check, as probably most of you know, the king has to move. There's no way to capture one of the pieces because the other one is still giving check. There's also no sense in interposing. It's not even allowed. If I try, it doesn't work. There's no way to put the rook on g3 because of the second check. So white has to move his king. If he would have moved back into the corner, there's a mate on h2 because the rook is protected. And unfortunately, the rook on g1 hinders white's king to escape. So in the game, Morten Hendriksen played king h3, but on the same square he was mated due to this obstacle. So the king has no squares. This square is covered by the rook. This square is covered by the rook. And this square is covered by, not by the rook, this square is covered by the bishop. So a nice mate. Let's put away the circles and watch the next example. I have to admit it's not as unknown as the other ones, but it's still very beautiful and it has to be in any Bronstein video that is worth its salt. So I show you the whole game because it's a short game. Bronstein with the white pieces. This game is actually taken from a simultaneous exhibition. So Bronstein is white, but we do not know who his opponent was. Bronstein with the white pieces played e4, e5, and now he played the middle gambit, and black took, and white regained his pawn, retook. So it's not a gambit actually, but it's called the middle gambit. And now his queen was chased. He went to a4. Kind of looks like Scandinavian, but it's not. It's just similar. So black developed. These are normal moves, theoretical lines. Now there's a move that is not so beloved by the masters of the game. d5, actually not theory. Bronstein played aggressively, actively, pinning the knight. And now his unknown opponent took on e4, Bronstein retook, and now it's unwise. It's not impossible, but it would be unwise to take the knight with the knight because the queen is hanging. So it's a pinned knight. His unknown opponent played queen to e7, countering pin with counterpin. And now Bronstein played a clever move, long castles. And of course, the knight still cannot take, it's still pinned, but the queen can take. And this is actually what happened in the game. And this is the position. Take your time and try to find the way in which Bronstein decided the game. I'll be back. So, if Bronstein were to just take, black could retake, and there is no mate on d8 because this knight can take it. So this was not what Bronstein did after this. He also cannot take here, sacrificing his queen. Looks nice, but still this rook cannot give mate because now the knight is not pinned anymore. There's no white queen here, it's a black queen. So let's go back. What did Bronstein do? He played the beautiful move rook to d8 check. At this point, there's still a white queen here. This knight is pinned, therefore. It cannot take. So there's only two moves. Black can take, or he can go to e7. Let's look at the move first, which he made in the game. Rook king to d8. So what has happened? This knight was pinned. It's not anymore. But now this knight is pinned. Well, that's unfortunate because this knight is actually the protection, or used to be the protection of the queen. So after queen takes e4, the opponent of Mr. Bronstein, he resigned actually, which is okay. It's resignable. Of course, he has a minor piece and a rook for a queen, and there are positions in which you can fight, in which this is at least worth a try. In this position, it's not really worth a try. Black is underdeveloped, his king is in the center, and the queen is very mighty. And so he resigned, rightfully so. What would have happened if he would have played king to e7? Well, the same thing. Now the knight is still pinned. And the only difference is after queen takes e4 check, king to d8, it's white's move, so white is even better off. So that was example number 3. We get to example number 4. In this position, Bronstein being white again, he has a clever tactic, and the last move was rook to d8. His opponent, Yuri Kaem, here's his claim to fame as a person losing to Bronstein by a nice tactic. You go and check if you can find it. And I'm back. The correct way to play in this position is knight takes c7. And well, the obvious immediate justification is if you just take the knight, you lose your rook with check. And well, now you're down a rook and a pawn. You're down an exchange and a pawn. And this is not really worth fighting. Well, you can find it, but it's a foregone conclusion. So the real question is, what happens if black decides to trade first with check? Otherwise, you could take the queen, but it's a check. So white can take back two ways. If he just takes back with the rook, well, he's still down a piece because black can interpose with the bishop. There's no mating attack, nothing. And so he just lost a piece. But there's the clue of the story. If you place queen to d1, after rook takes c7, there's queen d8 check. And this check wins back the rook. And in this position, white is up the exchange, also up this monstrous pawn. So there's not much sense in playing this way. So what happened after knight takes c7, there actually was a trade on d1, but then Mr. KM did not take the knight because in this position, taking the knight would just lose the exchange. He played queen to e7, but after a few more moves, he resigned. This pawn, this extra pawn proved decisive. And I spare you the details because the important tactic has been seen. Let's go on to Bronstein against Boris Goldenov. In this position, Bronstein being white, again, he's down a pawn, but he's in a totally one position. Black's king is in the center, cannot go anywhere because the queen hinders the castling. Also, he would end up on the c-file, which doesn't make sense. But also to the king side, no castling because the rook already has moved. You wouldn't want to castle to the king side because of bishop h6, of course, but that's another story. Goldenov, in a totally lost position, made a few more moves. He played knight to b5, protecting the c7 square, which, by the way, was otherwise white's next move. Rook to c7, the rook would be protected by the second rook, and it would attack the queen, and behind it, the f-pawn. So that was the strong threat. And to counter it, Goldenov played knight to b5, protecting the c7 square, also attacking the c3 rook. Now what did the rook do? It just went back. Bronstein was just calmly retreating his rook. Now Goldenov made an offer, queen to d8, offering the exchange. And if white would have taken it, he's still lost, but it's worth a try because he has one extra pawn and maybe a miracle happens and he can, in this position with an exchange down, maybe he can do something. Maybe he can fight a little bit. But this is not what Bronstein did. Bronstein played very prosaically. Instead of taking the queen, he played queen to f4. And now Goldenov went back because now his queen had been attacked by the bishop, which makes a difference. So he played queen to d7, and now Bronstein just played a4, winning the knight and forcing resignation. The knight cannot move anywhere because it's needed to protect c7. If it goes to a3, rook to c7 will be decisive. So he would have just to give up the knight, and he decided to give up the game. But that was not the tactic that I wanted to show. In this situation, after queen d8, there was a beautiful tactic possible. Bronstein didn't see it, but you can see it. Take your time, pause the video if you want, and I'll be back in 3 seconds. So the correct move is rook to c8. Beautiful sacrifice and aesthetically pleasing because this rook theoretically can be taken 3 ways. But if we look closer, we see right away queen c8 doesn't make sense. There's a mate. The second way to take bishop c8 is actually a hindrance to the protection of the rook. So now we can just take the queen with mate. Too bad. So there's only one move one really dares to think, which is rook to c8. But now, unfortunately, the same thing happens again. White just reestablishes basically the same position as before. The queen cannot take. We've seen that. There's a mate. And the bishop cannot take because we take with mate. So this is over. This would have been over. As I said, it was just a hypothetical. It didn't appear in the game. Next game, Bronstein with the black pieces. He is in his last tournament ever, or at least the last tournament which is recorded in the database. And it's 1997. He's playing against a young lady called Thea Lanchava. Bronstein this time with the black pieces. He played knight to g4. Decent move, but not decisive or very strong actually. Just a move. But he is threatening something. He's threatening a fork. And of course, this is something white has to react to. He could have played rook to e1, or you could have played this rook to e1. But actually, there was a little trap in this move knight to g4, and Thea Lanchava fell for it. She played rook to f3, and rook to f3 protects the e3 square, and probably the idea behind it was to place the second rook on the f file, then open the f file and maybe create some pressure on f7. But that didn't happen. Bronstein had a beautiful reply, and you are invited to find it. I'll be back in 3 seconds. And here we go, knight to d4. Another fork, this time actually on the board, was the decisive move. It threatens rook and queen. And if it is taken, black could take back, given another fork. So that's the third fork, the second, the third fork, not the second on the board, because Thea Lanchava did not take on d4. She played queen a4 check, which is a move that Bronstein had to see, but he did see it. Bishop d7, attacking the queen and defending the king. So the queen went back, and after knight takes f3, queen takes f3, white is down in exchange. At the moment, he controls f8, so black cannot castle. That's why Bronstein right away played c5. He actually managed to convert his advantage. So let's move on to the next game. In this position, Bronstein with the black pieces actually is lost because this pawn is too strong. But he made a move which allowed his opponent, famous opponent, Sokolsky, Alexei Sokolsky, he has an opening named after him, which is not something many players can say. 1b4 is also called the Sokolsky opening. Bronstein played rook e8, and Sokolsky now had the opportunity to really shine, to make a brilliant finish. And if you want to, check it out. Otherwise, just wait 3 seconds. I'll be back to present the rest of the game. So, as I say, it wasn't the only move possible, but it was the most beautiful finish, I would dare to say. He played queen to h8, Mr. Sokolsky did. Bronstein had only one valid move. The king cannot escape because of the pawn. And now this pawn becomes the hero in the story. He played d7, Alexei Sokolsky, threatening the rook and temporarily sacrificing his queen. That's the beauty of it. If black takes, white can take the rook, promoting, check, and now there's two moves. If you place king takes e8, there's a skewer. The queen is gone in the next move, and white is up a rook. The same thing is true after king g7. If I take the queen and black takes back, I'm still up a rook, which is the rook I took on e8. So, it's a beautiful finish. You might wonder what happens if in this situation black just puts the rook one square to the right, his direction, one square to the left from the viewer. And it's still won in many ways, but the strongest way is queen to f6. Attacking the rook, it cannot be defended. So there's one move that comes to mind, rook to d7, rook takes d7, but then it's a mate in 2, check. Black has to interpose and mate. And if he doesn't take on d7, there's hardly anything he can do. He can go to a8, but then there's check. Black has to take, and now we can even make a rook, and it's still mate. So, beautiful finish. d7, a really dazzling finish to a very nice victory. Next game, third to last, it's Bronstein against another player who has opening systems named after him. It's Ragozin, Vyacheslav Ragozin. And white, Bronstein is slightly better, but not by so very much. He played knight to d3, attacking this pawn a second time, and it's only defended once. So the first move that comes to mind is to defend it, which is actually what Ragozin did. And it's not a good move, unfortunately. I just show you the best move he should have played, bishop to f3. Would have been best, but it's easy to say in hindsight. He played rook to e6, and now white actually can win the game, and it's your opportunity, or maybe a challenge, to find the way he did it. White to move. I'll be back in 3 seconds. So the obvious knight takes f4 doesn't work. The pawn is pinned, that's true, so the knight cannot be recaptured immediately. But queen to g5, very annoying. It's a counter pin, and white actually loses his knight. So this is not the way to go about it. White can play rook to g1, and this is what Bronstein did. Very strong move, attacking the bishop, also keeping an eye on g5. So what did Ragozin do? He played bishop to f3, attacking this pawn. But now it really is possible to take on f4. There's no queen g5 anymore, and knight takes f4, attacks the bishop and attacks the rook. The bishop is attacked by the queen, discovered attack, and this is totally lost. Ragozin played bishop takes e4, but this didn't last very long. After rook e1, bishop d5, there was even a queen trade, and after 2-3 more moves, Ragozin had enough of this and resigned. Second to last game, Bronstein's last victory in a tournament game, at least the last one in a database. It's Gerd Lichtering with the white pieces against Bronstein with the black pieces, and Lichtering now made the interesting decision to sacrifice his knight against the pawn. Bronstein retook, and Lichtering's idea had been to regain the knight. He pinned it and attacked it, and Bronstein played bishop f5, protecting the knight, also breaking the pin. And now Lichtering played queen to f3, which is a mistake. Bronstein played queen e7, and to my surprise, Lichtering resigned in this position. I wonder if he had seen the finish. Maybe he had. Maybe he was just annoyed by something else. Maybe Bronstein was smoking. We don't know. But I wondered what happens after rook e1. Well, rook e8, kind of obvious. But what happens if white just slowly doubles his rook? Rook e2, threatening rook to e1 and regaining the knight. So I couldn't figure it out, I have to admit. But the thing is, black doesn't really have to be worried. That was surprising to me. After rook fe1, there's a beautiful way to keep the upper hand, and I invite you to solve along. Black has only one way to keep his advantage, but he has one way, and let's see if you find it. I'll be back in 3 seconds. Queen to h4. What a beautiful and counterintuitive move, because you remove actually a defender from e4, but it's the only way to keep the knight on e4. Reason being, if white takes it now, black retakes, attacking the queen, which is also a pin. So white has to take, and now there's a beautiful, beautiful X-ray finish. The queen gives check, is protected through the white rook by the black rook. White has only 1 or 2 moves. This is one of them. Black retakes. The king is in check. It cannot escape. And, well, white has only 1 move, and it's still mate in the next move. Beautiful X-ray defense. That's, of course, important to see if you play queen h4. If you just trade on e4, well, white has actually gained a pawn, which was the idea of knight takes e4, the very first move. We saw you wanted to gain this pawn, and he has in this position actually managed to do so. And if after queen h4, white tries something like rook to g1, intending to take with the next move, and if black defends, well, then you play rook e1 again and you have a draw. But black doesn't play queen e7, he plays queen to f6. And now you still cannot take, which is interesting, because after rook takes, king takes, bishop takes bishop, black is up a piece, and if white takes it, well, there's this nasty check, regaining material and actually coming out ahead, a rook against the pawn. So this would be the point of queen f6, but the real thing I wanted you to check out and to find was queen h4. And now we're coming up to the last example. It's Bronstein against Geller. Very strong player, extremely strong player, also for many years, many decades actually. And Bronstein has the white pieces, and he just captured on b7. And Geller decided to trap the rook, hopefully being able to attack and win it later. Right now, queen a6 is not threatened because the white queen defends this square, but the rook might be in some danger. This is what we think. Bronstein started an attack on this side of the board, and now Geller took on d4. And Bronstein could have just taken back with the pawn, and would have been nice for white. It would have been a good position, but he played g5. He was adventurous. Now there's one move that comes to mind right away. It's rook takes c3, but there's bishop d2, and actually it's a good variation for white. If you take the queen, I take your queen, and now two pieces are hanging by black. And if black takes the a3 pawn, attacking the bishop, well, there's an intermediate exchange, and now white is up a piece. Black can take this pawn and create a passer, but the passer will not go anywhere because it just won't. Let's go back. So this is not what happened. Geller took on e3, creating other problems, and now Bronstein actually took on f6, and Geller played rook takes c3, figuring that he would have compensation for the piece he just sacrificed, and there's no bishop d2 anymore because of this pawn. But now comes the reason why Bronstein actually ventured into this line. You may find it. Take your time, pause the video, and let's see what you come up with. In 3 seconds, I'll be back. Okay, so it's another one of those bombshells, another one of those very striking moves, and it's very beautiful. Queen to g6. Who would have thought that this move is even possible? The immediate threat is queen g7 mate, so the only defense is really to take the queen. Geller didn't do this. He resigned, which might be the better move, but he could have taken, and then it's a mate in 2. Rook takes g7 with check, and all of a sudden this trapped rook is one of the deciding actors in the finale. Doesn't matter if the king moves to f8, it's a mate on g6, or if he moves to h8, it's the same mate. I leave it at that. This was my little collection of unknown tactics by Grandmaster David Bronstein, one of the leading players of his generation. And if you liked the video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I plan to do more English videos in the near future, and any subscription is encouragement for that. So thanks very much for watching, for solving along if you did. If you want to, let me know in the comments what I can improve, except for my English. See you next time.